So I wanted to set up context, to set up a platform, and then open this up for discussion. So we have people from Tazama and other people who are involved in the DPG, digital public goods space as well. So from a Mojaloop experience and from what I've seen with other ecosystems, not too much, but from the outside like Tazama and Mosip, OpenCRVS, and Mifos, what we are seeing is maintaining a DPG is a non-trivial task. It's critical for its adoption and many other things as well. So there are a lot of considerations here and challenges. And I also wanted to look at how can we create value that benefits other players in the system as well, and how can we collaborate. And finally, we only have 45 minutes, but I was thinking we can summarize with some lessons from this session as we move away from this. So probably most of you know there are some organizations or entities that already collaborate and help with the DPGs. Like we have the DPGA, Digital Public Good Alliance. I just checked today, and it had about 193 entities part of that, technologies or open source platforms, close to the number of countries. And so they maintain a DPG registry. There are some standards that everyone has to, these applicants have to adhere to be listed in the registry. And then there are standards, and they also publish blog posts, state of the DPG ecosystem reports, and many things that help this ecosystem. And there are other groups as well, like UNDP. We have Open Source Initiative. We have members here who probably know more, and forgive my ignorance if I'm not listing any entities who do work in this area. I'm happy to learn and include those and incorporate into our learnings for the future. We have GitHub, Linux Foundation, FSF, Apache Foundation, Mozilla Foundation, doing a lot of work in the open source space as well. And some organizations like CoDevelop. Even in India, there are some organizations who are doing regional efforts for driving adoption and doing advocacy for open source platforms. So there are a lot of challenges in this space. There are benefits, of course, but on the challenges side, I wanted to categorize them like into 4 groups. There may be more, but I was thinking of 4 groups. Primarily, of course, the adoption of open source software and platforms. Advocacy is another aspect of it, and then maintenance and sustainability. Today, I wanted to focus on the maintenance aspect of DPG challenges, and as part of that, I've listed out some categories here. What I'm thinking is, for those of you who just joined us here, I'm trying to set up context and lay a foundation so that we can discuss what are the challenges in the open source space, in the digital public good space, and how can we make solving these problems more efficient? How can we create value so that whoever is managing or maintaining these DPGs can benefit from that and use the time and space gained from that in other core efforts? So for example, some of the problems in DPG maintenance are, let's say, maintaining a GitHub organization. They may use other tools for source code maintenance and version control, but metrics and standards are a big part of that. So for example, how do we maintain a GitHub enterprise or GitHub organization that hosts all these open source code? What are the standards? What are the rules to be set for security? What are the contribution guidelines? And then the next aspect can be, I'm sorry that you can't see this. If we can, once we get a projector, you'll probably see this on the screen here. And then the release cycle, like how does the release cycle happen? Like what are the standards there? What are the industry best practices or guidance around releasing good quality software that just works? And then having some utilities and tools, like how can we create libraries and tools which can be reused without much issue, which are well documented, that can benefit anyone who's facing a similar problem. So these are common problems. They are not specific to, let's say, Tazama or Mosip or Mojaloop. Any entity that wants to use open source software has these common problems. So how do we solve these and create common standards and guidance around this so that we can just focus on our work? Tazama can do fraud management, Mojaloop on payments, Mosip on IT, instead of doing, spending time on doing the technical debt and overhead of all these activities. There are licensing issues. So how do we ensure compliance? How do we ensure when contributions are made that there are no issues with license? When libraries change their licenses, how do we go about that? Version upgrades, keeping source and projects up to date, ensuring that the main branches are protected, there is safety around contributions. And how do we streamline contributions themselves? Like how do we ensure all the tests are run, how all our quality standards are met when contributions are made, while not making it too difficult for the contributors. And then addressing technical debt in general. So those are the things I wanted to bring up. And I'll give some examples. In Mojaloop, for example, we have, let's say, about 50 repositories that are included in a Mojaloop release. And for all these, if there is a single security vulnerability in one of the services, that may apply to multiple repositories in the ecosystem, like for 20 or 30 of those. So we have to fix that in all of these differently, and then bring them all together and bundle them for the Mojaloop release. So I was looking at that, and also we have several dependencies, like we have MySQL, we have Kafka, Node.js, and the operating system like Ubuntu that we use for our images, Docker, Nginx, so all these. And they have their own release cycle, and they have their own standards. So how do we ensure we are on the right version? We are not getting out of date, or we are not trailing them too badly. Those kind of things. I want to hear from you, especially those who are involved in this community and have done this work for a while. And before we leave this room, I want to have at least a few lessons and things that we can incorporate, especially into Mojaloop, but also others. So what are the problems or challenges that you have encountered, and what do you think can solve them efficiently? And finally, how can we create common value for the DPG ecosystem?
So for me, is you talked about sort of making sure that there is consistency across all of these products, and I kind of picked that out as a central theme. And I think that is something for us that we, as a sort of a relatively new project, we started out and we had exactly all of the same questions, right? How do we make sure that our code is secure? How do we make sure that the versions of the software that we depend on, the licenses are in place, that we are using all of those softwares appropriately? And it immediately occurred to us that these aren't new questions. We're not the first people to actually ever have to ask these questions, but it did feel like we had to reinvent the wheel because there was no library of information that we could draw on that accept our own experience to say that these are questions that we need to answer, and then we had to go and find our own solutions. And kudos to the Mojaloop team is we found working with people from Mojaloop who had literally just gone through that same cycle of finding all of these questions and having to answer them was very helpful for us. And we could lean on the Mojaloop community and people who had already been through this process to come and help us get the answers to the questions, and even in some places point out which questions we hadn't yet come around to asking. But surely there must be another way that we could disseminate that kind of information so that you don't have to worry about it on your own. You could lean on other people who'd already been through that journey and then just follow the steps, because it's exactly the same thing for every one of our DPG projects, right?
True.
But who's going to do that, right? Because now you're talking about creating some sort of central authority, or at least a central repository of information where you can say, okay, step by step. So you are a DPG. These are the things that you need to do. And I guess that somebody like the DPG Alliance would be well placed as a central authority to deal with some of those things, at least to be able to give people a starting point.
Good point, yeah. I didn't think of having like a central place like that, but I suppose that includes it. How do we create value? And maybe that's a way to start. Yeah. For example, we have the Mojaloop testing toolkit. We always call it the TTK. I think it's a wonderful tool, fantastic tool, which every DPG that uses an API can use. But how do we evangelize for that? Or how do we advocate for that? And how do we help others to benefit from or help them avoid reinventing the wheel, as you said? So, Matt, any thoughts on how we can generalize these solutions so that let's say Mojaloop can learn from something that Performer went through. For example, you're looking at changing the databases from ArangoDB to possibly something else. So any any thoughts on generalization?
So it seems like, and maybe Tiger Beetle is a great example where like the database that you're using is a separate thing. And so, those then don't have to, so if the testing toolkit, for example, was a, sort of separate thing from the Mojaloop code base, and kind of had some evangelism around it separately, seems more likely to, sort of gather some community that would help to maintain and keep it up and running and moving forward. And that, is really such a key to open source is, assembling components to do good stuff. And, most of the open source assets out there aren't like enterprise software, they're like tools, right? And so, anytime you find that you've got a generalizable, usable tool, maybe think about sort of segmenting it off and building some bit of separate community around that.
Good point. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. So modular solutions, and when you think something is generalizable, try to make it independent. Yeah. Good point. Thank you.
So my name's Amanda. I've come from the UK. I run an open source organization, a country organization for the UK. So we're this sort of industry body in the UK. I used to be a lawyer, and I spent 5 years in a company called Canonical, which is an open source company with the Ubuntu operating system. So I've dealt with all sorts of policy and governance things around open source rather than being an engineer. And a lot of my work now is engaging with communities and talking to people about it. So I think there are probably different work groups you need to have a successful project. And you need the technical engineering piece. You need to know what your specification is, what you're building to, and what your goals are. But also, to build a community, you need expertise, and you need people who will talk, who will disseminate the information, attend events like this, engage other people. And that is something that's often overlooked, but it's a bit of an art form. And the people who are good at that are really good at that. They know how to build interest and then get engagement from software communities and communities around it. Because you also need people to do documentation. You need people to do evangelism. You need people who will do the governance work for you to make sure that the project is well managed. And in an ideal world, your goal isn't just to build the software, it's to build software that other people will also want to use and want to engage with and then contribute back their contributions. So when I talk about governance, you need things like contribution policies. So it's slightly disconcerting because the mic keeps changing while I'm speaking to you. But you need things like your contribution policy. You need to know how you take contributions. You need to know how people can go off and set up their own sub-communities. You have to think strategically across all of that. And I think there are many different skills that you need to identify and make sure that you build into this. Sam, do you want to... I'm happy to speak more as you go into more detail, but I think you want to engage lots of people in this. So everybody always tells me, when I speak a lot at conferences, and I always ask that question, and people always tell me it's about the software being on an open source license and everybody being able to use the code. But actually, that's only a little bit of it. And if that's all that you create, you'll put your code on GitHub and nobody will ever use it. And what it's about is creating a community, creating engagement, creating something that people will recycle and reuse, and which will never get locked in to any particular supplier because it becomes that universal thing. It becomes a de facto standard. And there's a whole list of individual components. If you want to share something, I can help you. But there's a whole list of things that you need to do to make sure that happens. And particularly when you look at code that the public sector and philanthropic organizations pay for, they often get that wrong because they're not engaged in the same way that an enterprise is. So an enterprise is always thinking, how can I keep people coming back to use my product? But often philanthropists, often public sector, they forget about that bit.
Thank you, Amanda. That's great advocacy right there for open source. So, Derek, any thoughts on like coming from the technology background? Can you offer any thoughts on this? Like, what would you want to see in a, let's say, a platform or a module before you want to adopt into your own stack, something like that?
I will use my experience currently. We've been trying to wrap our heads around the Mojaloop ecosystem, and we've picked some good things, some very interesting things, and the thoughts behind some of the technical architectural decisions that were made on the platform. One of the things I would have appreciated more is more deeper insight on why some of the decisions were made. It requires me talking to someone like James Bush to understand, and I've been having those conversations, and it's been very pleasant, and we've been learning so much, implementing everything we think or we have had, which is everything he's told us, on our current implementation outside of even the Mojaloop setup. So I think this Mojaloop the implementation has taken years to get where it is. And some of us coming into terms with it is we are like 5-6 years behind that kind of thought. Maybe that simplification, some of the information provided will be good for some of the budding technical teams. Yeah.
Come to you at the end for lessons.
Thanks, Sam. Sorry. If this is premature, please just stop me. I know the title of the session here is specifically maintaining a DPG and how you can give value to other DPGs. There has been a considerable amount of effort in recent times amongst the community of DPGs in the world to try to understand how they can work together better. What's been noticed, I think, is that every time a new project comes along in a particular territory, there's a lot of reinventing the wheel every time, every implementation. And I think what we're trying to do in Mojaloop is become part of that wider community of DPGs. How do we interoperate with things like MoSIP for identification, or with the many great other DPGs around for citizen registration, national ID schemes, etc. How can we make our systems talk to each other and gain the benefit from our own particular focus on our missions to deliver a greater mission, which is to provide an end-to-end platform for building digital government, digital solutions that really benefit citizens of the world. I think the answers to that are really complicated and deep, and they go from everything from API standards through conventions, naming conventions. How do you make sure that your APIs can be consumed by other systems? Just even understanding the landscape of other DPGs that exist in the world and where you might fit in a particular territory as part of a broader solution. That helps you think more high-level architecturally about how you expose your system to the rest of the world, what interfaces you provide, what messaging protocols you might decide to standardize on. But that architecture exists at many different levels. So as well as being part of that bigger picture of lots of DPGs, I think the people who are making strategic decisions about managing the product direction of DPGs in general also have to think about the lower layers. As Matt mentioned, a lot of DPGs out there, they're open source, but they're also based on other smaller open source projects. So there's a wealth of these small building blocks out there in the world, and we're constructing solutions from those smaller building blocks. We're calling them DPGs like Mojaloop or Mosip or Tazama, but those now become bigger building blocks for building bigger systems, systems that enable much more impact, that's repeatable as well. You don't have to keep reinventing the same things time and time again. You don't have to invest huge amounts of time and effort and money to integrate these systems over time. So I think to move us forward from where we are to that vision of a smorgasbord of solutions that you can pick off the shelf and simply, cheaply, quickly integrate to build a truly open, inclusive digital government style platform, we need to shift our thinking from looking inwards at our own solutions and start thinking about how we fit within the bigger ecosystem of other DPGs and proprietary systems, the existing things out in the market that we're likely to have to integrate with. That's what I'm thinking about at the moment anyway.
Thanks, James. So having both a macro perspective and a micro level perspective as well on how we fit into the broader ecosystem, but also how do we create value at the smaller levels that can be reused. Yeah, great, thank you. Any other thoughts before we move on? So for Mojaloop, I already have at least, I think, 3 lessons here, and I want to take more, but before that, please, any thoughts? Yeah, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Pericles from Bank of Cape Verde. I have a doubt or a concern. It is about the going on premises with the whole Mojaloop solution. The package we have to install it offline. We know most of the time the package have other dependencies inside that goes to the internet. I would appreciate to see or to know if there is a map, a documentation straight to the very detailed level that shows all the dependencies that for someone to go to want to put it completely offline, the road that he has to take and the main points that he have to focus his attention on. Okay, thank you.
I think I understood your question, but please tell me if I don't answer it completely. So I think there's multiple elements that you might be asking about. One is understanding the complete bill of materials. What are all the components and all the license terms, etc., for everything I'm going to have to install on my servers to make sure that I'm compliant. I don't owe anybody money. I'm not going to get sued for using somebody's software without paying a license agreement. So one of the things we do in Mojaloop is we produce a bill of materials. We call it SBOM, S-B-O-M, Software Bill of Materials. And it's created by an automated tool that analyzes our code base every time we make a release. And it generates a list of all the dependencies and their dependencies and their dependencies, the complete tree. And it generates a huge document in an Excel spreadsheet, I believe it is at the moment, with all the license terms, for, all the version numbers, everything you would need to know to perform a full audit on that software. We use that tool ourselves to make sure that we don't cause an adopter of Mojaloop software to have to use a dependency for which they have to pay a license fee. So we take a lot of care. We have legal intellectual property lawyers who we ask to scan our set of licenses for dependencies, and they give us a legal opinion as to whether those licenses are applicable under the various circumstances of people using the software. So we do give a cast iron guarantee that a Mojaloop release will have a full bill of materials, and all of the components will be licenses that are compatible with the Mojaloop license, which is an Apache 2.0. That means there's no fees, there's There's no requirement for you to share any specialization code that you build, like some open source licenses require you, if you make a change or an addition, you have to publish that. There's none of those restrictions at all. We take a great deal of care to make sure we don't land our adopters with that kind of responsibility or risk. But as I say, we publish the SBOM, so our adopters are free to get their legal experts to examine it as well. There might be another part of your question, which is, what do I need? What do I need? What are the full list of things I need to be able to run this on premise on my servers? I'm gonna cover that in a. I will cover that quickly in one of the sessions tomorrow, but we do have documentation that covers the process for installation, what the prerequisites are, the starting points, what versions of X, Y, Z you'll need. But like I say, we do give a guarantee that all those components are open source, compatible with our license. No fees, no need to disclose any changes.
Thank you, James and Pericles, for the question. So recently we finished this activity, and it's very efficient. It's part of our CI/CD. And this is one of the things I think is a common problem as well for all DPGs, because every open source platform, a digital public good, wants to make sure that they only use libraries that are compatible with their license, whatever that may be. And I think we can avoid them trying to reinvent the whole thing. Probably Tazama also has something like that as well. So we have a list of licenses that are compatible with Mojaloop. And whenever any contribution is made, whenever something is added to Mojaloop, we check whether that complies with this set of licenses. And if it doesn't, it fails right away at the contributions step. So how can we make this like for example, someone comes and wants to start a new product or a platform or open source software-based tool, how can they benefit from it? Like, how can we make it available for them, I think is the bigger question. And we've done like lots of these tools, the SBOM scripts, for example. Maybe you've done something else as well. Maybe we can come up with a unified tool that we can share with the rest of the community as well, the DPG community.
I think for me, it's not about the specific problem, but I think the general sentiment of closer collaboration amongst DPGs, not just for shared problem solving, but also to share each other's solutions and to utilize each other's solutions where we can. So between Tazama and Mojaloop, there's a very natural fit, right? Tazama does the transaction switching, Mojaloop does the transaction switching, Tazama does the transaction monitoring, and there's synergy there. But there are so many other DPG products as well that have their own niche specialties. And if you had to explore, you said there were how many? Almost 200 different DPGs at the moment? Yes. So surely between all of those, there are overlapping requirements, right, where we could leverage each other's capabilities rather than going to go out and find or build our own components for that. And I think just in our participation with the DPG Alliance, they do have their sort of, where they feature certain products. It would be great to understand what other products are offering so that we can know where they can complement our own solutions and where we can work together to build fewer things ourselves, but more rely on things that are available somewhere else.
Yeah, agreed.
So Sam, I would maybe just add quickly to that, because I was maybe on the front end of the Linux work a little bit more. And Linux has some specific tools, and so, you know, when we were talking about license types, you know, and I referenced, hey, Mojaloop's got a tool that they built for doing that, and Linux was like, we've had one for years, right? And so, sort of getting connected to other open source community, and learning from the way that they've solved problems and reusing those things. And so, you know, DPGA might be a great place to do that as well, but it would be a shame if they sort of rebuilt a bunch of stuff that, you know, Linux has as open source and just, you know, like so many projects are just shelfware because people don't know about them and nobody does anything to sort of publicize them. But you know, because I think everybody knows like 80% of what's in GitHub is, you know, sort of never accessed by anybody other than who put it there. And so I would say, you know, start by kind of mining what's out there.
Just to add to what the gentleman was saying, looking at what's on GitHub, I often call it a GitHub wasteland, because there's hundreds of packages, thousands of packages that nobody's ever going to touch. And what you want to do is understand the good health of a project when you use it. So you want to be engaging collaboratively in the right projects and using things collectively, where many of you know that you're all going to use the same thing, so that as you invest in staff, in people contributing, in maintenance, the more that you know that the others are also going to use the same things, the healthier and more alive that project is going to become. And part of that is the software engineers, but you have to remember the whole ecosystem around it.
Yeah, and I very much agree with your sentiment. There is, in my experience, a tendency for software engineers to want to bring the latest shiny trends into their projects. Experience tells us that's not always the wisest thing for software that needs to last a long time and be maintainable into the future. I do think that organizations like the DPGA, the DPG Alliance, some kind of centralized coordination is desirable. I tend to favor that model personally, just because I think if there's somebody whose mission is to align DPGs, they'll be pushing the other guys in the right direction. Whereas if it's more of a matrix, you know, people trying to align themselves, I think that's probably going to be a bit more patchy and messy in the end. But a central organization like that, I think, could bring a tremendous amount of value in this respect. And it's certainly something that we're trying to engage with a bit more. And there's a number of programs running currently being sponsored by Co-Develop, I think, who are the main guys pushing this. So I'd encourage anyone who has involvement with other DPGs to mention that and come join the party.
So I did look at DPGA's goals and what they're doing primarily. I could have missed something, obviously, but they're doing a lot of good work in advocacy and collaboration. But I haven't found like anything on their website related to common tool set, like tools for usual things like, okay, if someone wants to set up a new GitHub org, okay, these are all the things you'll need, choose from this. I think that would be fantastic. So I haven't found that. Maybe that is something we can propose to DPG, whether they accept it or not. But it looks like we're converging that doing it centrally would be more valuable, and creating independent and documentation and advocacy is a big part of that. So I'm noting these down. We'll definitely follow up and implement at least some of these in the coming quarters.
Thank you. So at Core Develop, for those who I don't know, my name is Desire. I work with the Core Develop Fund. We support governments to roll out DPI. So we actually have a particular project that we've been working on, which I think a few of the DPGs here might be sitting on. It's called DPG for DPI, which is trying to solve the exact problem we're talking about here. So we haven't gotten into the technical bits very much. So when it comes to tools, etc., we've not gotten to that level. But the idea is that how do we ensure that governments can easily pick up DPG? I think she asked a good question around, first of all, do we even understand open source? So the first thing that we were trying to address is when it comes to capacity in countries, to what level are governments informed enough to be able to pick the types of DPGs they want to work with before we even get to combining the different tool sets? So that capacity building of just understanding so that they can make an informed decision, that's where we need to start. So a recommendation that we've put out to that group, but I'm also putting it out here, is to first start to understand what do countries actually need, because the idea of DPGs is to solve particular problems. But if the way that, it's been the way that we are growing right now, all the DPGs are growing so fast, so much so that we're now not communicating directly with countries to find out, hey, what do countries need? So bringing the countries like closer and asking them, hey, what are some of the challenges that you're having and how can we ensure that we're working together to solve for these challenges? So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a lot of other players within the ecosystems, which I think the accelerator program tries to solve, but this is for all the other platforms, not just DPGs that look after payments. If IDs is the same thing. Data exchange is the same thing, that they are integrators within countries who understand the needs of the countries better. If we find a way to work with them, we might be able to then create solutions or tool sets that work for the system integrators. And I think in an ideal situation, it would be almost like we're dividing roles, that DPGs sit and work on the engineering and the software and like understanding how to change the product, and then we let system integrators, if possible, run with how then these products are scaling within countries. And then of course there are the other players who have been in the market longer and probably have, you know, more resources, like the cloud providers. We also have other hyperscalers that are very interested in the whole idea of DPGs and DPI right now, but they just don't know how to form the connection or work together. So bringing the Microsofts, the Azure, and all the other ones, that we could have the conversations with them. How do they come in? And I think from there, maybe we can then start to think about the toolkit. But those conversations need to be held, and they need to be held in the countries that they're being rolled out. Yeah.
Thank you, Desire.
So I think that's a really interesting conversation, and I understand exactly why you're thinking that way. I've worked in open source for nearly 20 years, and in 2011, the UK had the world's first open source first public policy. So all of our code should have been open source. And I think 2 weeks ago, my organisation submitted a proposal to the UK government and to how to actually make that happen. So nearly 15 years later, it hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened because having just a policy, or even having a law. Switzerland created a law last year. They're wasting their time. You have to have the detail that sits behind the policy. You have to know how you're going to make this happen. So you need the processes and the practices that will make the code open if you want it to actually deliver. And you will not save, governments do this because they think they're going to save money, right? You will not save any money, and you will get locked into the systems integrators you're talking about if you simply say we're going to be open source and then you bring them in to talk to you. One of the things that they did in the UK was create something called Government Digital Services, GDS, which has been replicated all over the world. Currently, it's being rebuilt for the first time in 10, 15 years. And there's a whole shift going on. And there's a lady here I was talking to at lunchtime. You have a major advantage. You don't have thousands of legacy systems. So you need to be super careful not to build those legacy systems and to build best in class, best in breed now, so that you are actually building the future. And to do that, you need to find expertise within your communities, from international communities, to understand how to do that without ending up locked in. Because if you end up locked in, you defeat the purpose of all of this.
Yeah, I think the value of a DPG is really the fact that all our markets are different. And there's always going to be the cost of how do I customize it for my specific market. And those nuances are always changing. Today it's going to be this, tomorrow it's going to be that. I don't think it's sustainable to do that with commercial proprietary software. And the DPG that's open source is getting the right balance between how much of this work are you doing yourself and how much are you doing with a system integrator. Yeah.
Thank you. I was expecting that someone will bring this up, saving me for speaking with my French English, sorry. But let me take the experience of public sector actor to bring something in this discussion. the way decisions are made in public sector is it's not really about the efficiency, the technical efficiency of the tool, of the technical easiness of adopting that tool. It is mainly about managing the risk the stakeholder is taking to choose that solution. For a stakeholder, public sector stakeholder to say, I'm going to work with Mojaloop, he had to consider the risk of deliverability, the risk of the tool being able to achieve the goal. And considering this, usually the public sector tend to rely on so-called experts on the subject. They prefer to go through, how do you call it, passation de marché, to find a firm or an integrator in case of technical solution who will take the risk of implementing and the risk of operating some time also, so that finally for them to be okay or to feel comfortable to choose an open source solution, it is important to have on the market companies or integrators that are really comfortable with that solution. That means there is a two-way to bring adoption on DPG and then digital public infrastructure. They need to move from the open source level to what the commercial sector call a real good, something that I can take and I can use. That journey needs to be taken, and later on, the journey from moving from a good to something that public sector can rely on, considering it should be really easy and quick to deliver, and really easy and quick to see the output of the solution, and without letting that stakeholder take too much risk. And I think in building these public infrastructure solutions, we need to consider all those aspects of the things to be sure to reach the goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morley, for sharing that perspective. And I think, yeah, for me, what I understand is it spans a whole spectrum of DPG. But I think to break it down and lessons that we can take is risk management is a big part of that. Support is a big part of that, supporting for DPGs. And at Mojaloop, we take those very seriously. And you'll hear across these days how we are doing that. But as a concept for DPG, I think we can document that. We need to provide a way for showing people who are adopters that the risk management is taken care of. This is how it can be supported, those kind of things. And we're trying to solve that problem from the other side also. How do we maintain this efficiently so that it is supported for the duration, for the life cycle of when the public sector takes it? Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a very valuable conversation. I had a lot of takeaways. It was very engaging. Appreciate all of your inputs and thoughts. Thank you. We'll enjoy the rest of the sessions.